Since the very beginning of World of Warcraft, one of the biggest questions that anyone asks is, what is the best race for my class? And it wouldn't matter what you're interested in, whether it's PvP or PvE, there'll always be a clear answer for what's best for Alliance and what's best for Horde for the content that you want to do. Well, in Mists of Pandaria, they had a little crack at trying to balance the races a little bit more. Whilst it wasn't particularly successful, and there's still obviously clear-cut winners for every different class, there's some changes that you need to know about, and some changes that was made back in original Mists of Pandaria that we don't even really think about a great deal today, because those particular racials that they try to balance kind of just don't matter. So firstly, before we start, there's a couple of things that you need to know about. Firstly, we're going to get a brand new race being the Pandaren, which I'll talk you through what all of those racials are. So they're going to be new racials, obviously, not racials that have changed. You need to understand the changes to getting hit and expertise capped, both for casters and for hunters. And this is really important, because up until this point, hunters have always only needed to get hit capped, they've never needed to get expertise capped, and casters have never got a benefit from expertise. Well, now everybody just needs 15%. So for melee, that will be 7.5% hit and 7.5% expertise. This will stop you from missing, and it will stop you from getting dodges. Hunters are not excluded from this anymore, so they'll also need 7.5% expertise to stop their arrows from dodging. The good thing is though, casters can now benefit from expertise, and it works exactly the same way as hit rating. So you need 15% hit, but it can be 15% made up of both hit and expertise. So this is incredibly important when we talk about some of the racial bonuses you get, such as weapon specializations, where at the moment in Cataclysm you'll get +3 expertise to, let's say, maces. Casters have never got any benefit from this whatsoever until now. Now, I'm going to fly through these as quickly as possible because I do want to cover every race, and some of them just really haven't had a great deal of change to worry about diving into too much. So firstly, let's talk about the Pandaren. This is the new race that both Horde and Alliance can be, and there's a lot of classes that can be a Pandaren. Your actual use ability that you're going to get is going to be Quaking Palm, and this is a 4-second incapacitate on a 2-minute cooldown. So particularly good for PvP, but even really good as an extra interrupt if PvE is more your thing, because normally you would use an incapacitate like this not for hard CC because it just doesn't last long enough. It would be normally a way to stop something casting. You're also going to get Bouncy, which basically just halves your falling damage, which, whilst there's no direct PvE benefit, it's just nice if you've ever fell off of something really high and died in game, then maybe being a panda, having this racial would save you. In terms of what profession bonus you get, where you get increased skill, that's going to be for cooking, and then Epicurean is really the biggest PvE bonus that you're going to get because it gives you double the amount from food buffs. Just as an example, if you was to use sea mist rice noodles as an agility user, that gives you 300 agility. So this racial is actually worth 300 of a primary stat, which is obviously pretty damn strong. Not only that, when you're leveling, you can earn twice as much rested XP as well with the racial in a piece. So Pandaren has got some pretty interesting racials, but really if you're just talking about in terms of gain in a PvE setting, Epicurean is the only one that you're bothered about. Moving on to Dwarf. Dwarf still has Stone Form, and that's completely unchanged, but gun specialization, which gives 1% crit at the moment with guns in Cataclysm, that's been replaced with Crack Shot. Now, Crack Shot gives 1% expertise, which is particularly useful because, as a hunter, you now need the expertise cap. The good thing is this isn't strictly with guns either, this is ranged weapons in general. When I said at the start of the video that there was one thing that Blizzard changed that kinda just doesn't matter, or something that we don't really take into consideration a great deal, is the resistance racials. So using the Dwarf as an example, you get Frost Resist. Well, they reworked all of these to just now give 1% damage reduction to that skull. But they actually considered the amount of resist you get at level 85 or even 90 to be too strong, so now any race that had some form of resistance, it's just now a flat 1% damage reduction from that skull. The other thing that's changed across the board is the specialization. So dwarves get mace specialization, which the bonus has changed from 3 expertise to just a flat 1% expertise. Now this is actually a very minor buff, because currently the racial works out to be in around 0.75% expertise, so now you're going to get a full 1% from it. And again, like I said at the start, this is even good for casters if you want to be a dwarf shaman. This is going to help you get hit capped, whereas up until now, completely useless for anyone that isn't melee. Humans have mace and sword specialization, like they do in Cataclysm, and the same goes for what I said about dwarves. This has changed from 3 expertise to 1%. For humans, all other racials remain the same, so you'll still get 10% extra reputation, which will be extremely useful early on in Mr. Pandaria, 3% spirit, and of course will to survive, previously known as every man for himself. Gnomes the same as human and dwarf, where you get short blade expertise, which gives you 1% expertise now with daggers and one-handed swords. There's a lot of gnome casters, so that change is actually pretty useful. The night elves, shadow meld and elusiveness still work exactly the same, so as a night elf you get 5% more movement speed while stealthed, but quickness has changed again. Quickness now gives 2% dodge to ranged and melee attacks instead of being a 2% reduced chance to be hit by them. If you've played a night elf for any length of time, you'll know this changes pretty much every expansion, from miss to dodge and then dodge to miss and then back to dodge again. The main difference really, if you're wondering how this has an effect, is there's going to be positional requirements, because you'll need to be facing the target to be able to dodge, and you also can't dodge while stunned, whereas the chance to be hit was just all the time. The good thing is though, for things like feral tanks where you can get rage from dodging, more dodge is a really good thing. Night elves also have nature resistance as a racial, which again, that has now just changed to a 1% flat damage reduction. For Draenei and Worgen, I'll just cover them both together because again, the only thing that's changed is the resistance. Now moving on to the Horde, let's start with Tauren because again, that's just the resistance. So nature resist is now going to be 1% less damage, and everything else for Tauren remains the same. But the one that I'm most excited to talk about is Undead, because actually out of all of the races, I think Undead is the one that gets the most interesting change. So firstly, you know what I'm going to say, shadow resistance has changed to a flat 1%. But there is something that gets added to Undead which is absolutely amazing, and that's Touch of the Grave. Now this actually replaces underwater breathing, which, let's be honest, with how long you can stay underwater as any race now, is kind of redundant. But in its place, yes, you're going to get Touch of the Grave. Touch of the Grave has got a 20% proc chance on a 15-second cooldown. It's literally free damage and free healing, and when you're questing at low level, the heal is actually really strong. Now this even scales with a few things like the Unholy DK Mastery, or even the extra shadow damage you get from being in shadow form as a shadow priest. It doesn't scale with anything else because it wasn't actually until Warlords of Draenor where it started scaling with attack power or spell power, so instead it just increases the amount of damage and healing, of course, because it's basically like a life steal that it's going to do each time you level up to around 13k when you're level 90. Now with no heirlooms on a level 1, this was actually healing for about 30 to 40% of my health every time it procced, which is pretty nuts. Everything else for Undead is exactly the same in regards to Cannibalize and even Will of the Forsaken. If you're a hunter, a warlock or a death knight and you're currently an orc, you might want to look away or turn the video off because there'll be one change that we're about to talk about that you might not like. But firstly, axe specialization, like all the other ones, has been changed to 1% expertise now with fists and axes. Hardiness for the stun duration reduction also remains completely unchanged, but command is the one that does get changed. So command's been nerfed, where at the moment it's 5% pet damage. In Mr. Pandaria, it gets reduced down to 2%. It kind of makes sense with just how overpowered orcs have always been, and while non-pet classes, this is neither here nor there, because the weapon specialization and Blood Fury is probably the reason you've gone an orc in the first place, makes it still super strong. It's just a little bit of a hit to the pet classes, losing that 3% pet damage. We can tear through the last three because there's not many changes. Troll, firstly, bow specialization, which at the moment gives you 1% crit with bows, has now been changed to Deadeye. So this is in line with the dwarves getting crack shot. This now gives 1% expertise with bows, guns and crossbows. Everything else stays exactly the same, so beast slaying still gives 5% extra damage to beasts, which is situationally really strong in Mr. Pandaria, by the way. Well, I mean, even really strong in Cata. And the main reason you go Troll is for Berserking, which also remains unchanged. Blood Elf sees a tiny bit of a nerf, but one you're probably not going to be too bothered about, because it revolves around Arcane Torrent. Now, according to Blizzard, back in Mr. Pandaria originally, it was never intended for Arcane Torrent to give 6% mana back, which really as a return, it's not massive, but going forward into MoP, it's only going to be 2%. Everything else about the ability remains the same, so it's still got an AoE silence. You'll use it exactly the same way. It's just instead of getting 6% mana back, you're going to get 2%. A bit of an unnecessary nerf in my opinion, but hey, it is what it is. And then finally Goblin, which if you're a Goblin, you'll be happy to know it doesn't change at all. You've still got your rocket jump, rocket barrage, you still get best vendor discounts, and and of course 1% haste, which is really, really strong. And that's all the race changes, or some races that just haven't changed at all. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to pick up a Rested XP guide, which is the fastest way to level, no matter what World of Warcraft version of the game you play, then links in the description and the pinned comment, and I'll see you on the next one.